Football is passion, football is pride, but sometimes football is more than just a game. It becomes war without weapons, but with the same emotions: hate, fear, revenge. There are matches that do not just decide points or trophies, they decide honor, identity, and history. Clashes so brutal, they burn themselves into collective memory, and that is what we uncover today: the 10 most brutal duels in football history. Fights on the pitch that shaped people far beyond 90 minutes. When we speak of brutal duels, people think of red cards, of violent tackles, of fights. But the truth goes deeper. Some of these matches were not just rivalries. They were stand-ins for political conflicts, for religious tensions, for historical wounds. That is why they were brutal, because it was never just about football. One of the most underestimated but fiercest rivalries. In the 1970s, Leeds were known as Dirty Leeds, a team of hard tacklers and uncompromising fighters. When Leeds faced Manchester United, it was not a match, it was war. Kicks, punches, brutal tackles. The pitch was a battlefield. Psychologically, this duel was a symbol of class conflict. The industrial working class of Leeds against the wealthier fans of Manchester. Football became the outlet for social rage. But Leeds against United was only a beginning, because there are duels that split entire cities, duels that divided families, duels where even police forces lost control. A clash in South America, so violent it is called El Super Clasico. A clash in Europe, where religion mattered more than the ball. And an international match, so full of hatred that scars remain decades later. All of this is still to come, and that is why you cannot look away. This is only the beginning, the first chapter of a journey into the darkest, hardest, and most brutal games in football history. But the truly legendary battles, the matches where blood was spilled, where careers ended, where hatred scarred generations, those are still waiting. In the next part, you will learn which South American rivalry set stadiums on fire, and why in Europe one derby became the symbol of religion and violence. If Manchester United against Leeds was a taste of brutality, then what comes next are the games where football crosses into something far darker, where the stadium is not just a place of sport, but a battlefield of history, identity, and survival. Buenos Aires, Argentina. Two clubs separated by only a few kilometers, but divided by an ocean of culture, class, and identity. On one side, Boca Juniors, born in the working-class neighborhood of La Boca. On the other, River Plate, once based in the same barrio, but later moving north to Núñez, with a reputation for wealth and privilege. This was not just a football match, it was the working class against the elites, the poor against the rich, a clash of entire ways of life. The psychology of El Super Clasico is raw. For Boca fans, every victory is validation of their roots. For River fans, every win is proof of superiority. Defeat is humiliation, and humiliation in Argentina lasts for generations. On the pitch, brutality is routine. Players are sent off, fouls turn into brawls, stadiums shake under the weight of 60,000 voices screaming hatred. The 2018 Copa Libertadores final was the ultimate example. For the first time, Boca and River met in South America's biggest final. The first leg ended 2-2, but before the second leg, chaos exploded. River fans attacked Boca's team bus, smashing windows, players injured by broken glass and pepper spray. The match had to be moved, not to another stadium in Argentina, but all the way to Madrid, Spain, because the violence in Buenos Aires was too dangerous to control. That moment showed the brutal truth. El Super Clasico is not just Argentina's derby. It is the most dangerous game in the world. The hatred cannot be contained, because it is not just about football, it is about identity itself. Glasgow, Scotland, a city divided not just by football, but by religion, politics, and centuries of cultural conflict. On one side, Celtic, historically Catholic, tied to Irish immigrants. On the other, Rangers, historically Protestant, tied to unionism and the British Crown. When Celtic and Rangers meet, it is not simply a derby. It is an eruption of history. Songs in the stands are not about football, but about battles, religion, and political identity. Flags are waved not in support of players, but of entire nations. Psychologically, the Old Firm is tribalism in its purest form. For fans, this is not sport. This is survival of identity. Every foul feels like an insult to faith. Every goal feels like a victory in a centuries-old war. On the pitch, brutality is expected. Hard tackles, red cards, confrontations between players are the norm. But off the pitch, the brutality has been even worse. Riots, fights, even deaths have been tied to Old Firm clashes. In 1980, the Scottish Cup final ended in chaos. After Celtic's victory, fans of both sides invaded the pitch. Fists, bottles, and even knives were used. Police with batons and dogs had to separate the crowds. It became one of the darkest days in... The Old Firm shows the terrifying psychology of group polarization. Individually, many fans are peaceful, but together, in the crowd, anger amplifies, identity hardens, and hatred grows. What begins as rivalry ends as violence. El Superclásico and the Old Firm are already brutal enough to stand as legends, but they are not alone. Across the world, other duels have created scars just as deep. In Turkey, two Istanbul giants fight in a rivalry so violent that even the police fear Derby Day. In South America, another clash has been called the match that started a war. And in Europe, one international rivalry became so poisonous that it shaped politics as much as sport. The story of brutality in football is global. From South America to Europe, from national teams to local neighborhoods, the psychology of rivalry is the same. Pride, identity, hatred, all compressed into 90 minutes that can explode at any second. El Superclásico, the Old Firm, two of the most brutal battles in football history. But we are only halfway through this journey, because still to come are the derbies that have spilled blood in Istanbul, the clashes that turned into international crises, and the matches that scarred nations for decades. The question is not whether football can be brutal. The question is, how far can brutality go before the game itself loses control? If Argentina gave us chaos and Scotland gave us religion, then Turkey and Europe gave us pure hatred. Because some derbies are not just about clubs, they are about cities, about nations, about scars that will never heal. Istanbul, a city that bridges Europe and Asia, and inside this city, a rivalry that splits millions of hearts in two. Galatasaray versus Fenerbahce. They call it the Intercontinental Derby because one club plays on the European side of the city, the other on the Asian side. This derby is not only the fiercest in Turkey, it is one of the most violent in the world. Matches often begin with smoke, fire and banners, and too often they end with fights, broken bones, and riots. The psychology of this rivalry is geography turned into identity. Support for one club is not just about football, it is about which part of the city you belong to, which street you live on, which side of the Bosphorus you call home. On the pitch, brutality is expected. Tackles that would be red cards elsewhere are seen as normal here. Players enter the stadium knowing they will leave with scars. One of the most infamous incidents happened in 1996. After a tense match, Galatasaray manager Graham Souness planted his team's flag in the center of Fenerbahce's pitch, like a conqueror after a battle. The image enraged Fenerbahce fans, and to this day, that act is remembered as a declaration of war. This is what psychologists call symbolic humiliation. It is not just about losing a game, it is about being dominated in identity. And when identity is attacked, violence is never far behind. Police presence at these derbies is massive. Armored vehicles, riot gear, helicopters. Because Istanbul knows, when Galatasaray and Fenerbahce meet, it is not just a football match. It is a battle for pride between two halves of a city. International football has given us rivalries of respect. But Germany against the Netherlands was never about respect. It was about revenge, humiliation, and scars left by history itself. The roots of the rivalry lie beyond football. In World War II, German occupation left deep wounds in the Netherlands. For Dutch fans, every match against Germany became a chance for payback, a symbolic war on the football pitch. The psychology here is collective trauma. Generations carried the weight of history, and football became the stage to release it. The rivalry exploded in the 1974 World Cup final. The Netherlands, playing total football, went ahead in the second minute without Germany even touching the ball. It was supposed to be their moment of destiny, but Germany came back. Beckenbauer leading, Gerd Müller scoring, and West Germany lifted the trophy in Munich. For the Dutch, it was humiliation. Not just losing a final, but losing it to Germany. For decades, that defeat defined Dutch football identity. Every time they met Germany, the anger returned. The chants filled with hate. The tackles became wars. In 1988, the European Championship semi-final reignited the fire. The Netherlands beat Germany in Hamburg, and Marco van Basten and Ronald Koeman mocked the Germans after the game. Koeman infamously wiped his backside with a German shirt, an act that symbolized decades of frustration finally unleashed. For Germans, it was seen as ultimate disrespect. For the Dutch, it was ultimate revenge. This rivalry shows the dangerous psychology of historic resentment. Matches were no longer just about football. They were about rewriting history, about symbolic justice, about wounds too deep to heal. So far, we have seen Buenos Aires burn, we have seen Glasgow divide, we have seen Istanbul erupt, and we have seen history haunt Europe. But the story is not finished, because there are still duels left that shook nations even more. A match in Central America that literally became the spark for a real war. A rivalry in Italy where violence spilled into the streets of Rome. And an international clash where brutality on the pitch was matched by brutality in the stands. These are not just football games. They are lessons in how identity, politics, and hatred can transform a sport into something far more dangerous. Galatasaray against Fenerbahce. Germany against the Netherlands. Two of the fiercest rivalries in history. But the darkest chapters are still ahead. The battles where lives were lost, where wars began, where football crossed the final line into chaos. And in the final part of this journey, you will discover the rivalries that were so brutal, they scarred entire nations forever. There are rivalries that hurt. There are rivalries that divide. And then there are rivalries so brutal that they spill beyond football, into politics, into blood, into war. In 1969, Honduras and El Salvador met in World Cup qualifiers. On the surface, it was just football, but underneath, it was immigration disputes, land reform, and political tension. The matches themselves were violent, players attacked, fans rioting, homes burned. After the second leg, anger boiled over. Within days, the two nations were at war. Psychologists call this displacement, when deeper social rage explodes in a symbolic arena. Football became the spark, but the fire was already burning. Hundreds died, and the world learned the terrifying truth: a football match can start a war. Rome, Italy, a city of history, religion, and power. And in the middle of it all, two clubs that hate each other with every breath: Roma and Lazio. The Derby della Capitale is not like Milan's stylish rivalry. It is dirty, raw, violent. Banners with political messages, flares lighting the night sky, and sometimes even fights inside the stands. This is the psychology of in-group versus out-group. Roma fans see themselves as the voice of the city. Lazio fans see themselves as defenders of tradition. Each side believes the other does not belong. On the pitch, the tackles are wild, red cards are routine. But in the stands, the violence is worse. In 2004, false rumors spread that a child had been killed by police outside the stadium. Riots erupted, cars burned, and the match was abandoned. The derby showed again, football in Rome is not just rivalry, it is life and death. International football often carries pride, but Argentina against England carried war. After the 1982 Falklands conflict, every match between the two nations was poisoned. In 1986, the World Cup in Mexico gave us one of football's most infamous moments: Diego Maradona's Hand of God. A goal scored illegally with his hand, but celebrated as divine justice by Argentina. For the English, it was cheating. For Argentinians, it was revenge. Psychologists call this moral reframing, where the same act is sin for one side, but salvation for the other. Minutes later, Maradona scored the goal of the century, slaloming through the English defense. It was not just a goal, It was Argentina's redemption. In 2002, they met again. The hatred was still alive. Every tackle carried history. Every foul carried memory. This rivalry shows that football is never just about the present. It carries ghosts. And sometimes those ghosts are wars. From Buenos Aires to Glasgow, from Istanbul to Rome, from El Salvador to England, football has shown us its darkest side. These duels are brutal, not because of red cards, but because of what they represent. Religion, class, history, politics, war. Football is a mirror of humanity. And when humanity is brutal, football becomes brutal too. Now listen closely. You've just seen the 10 most brutal duels in football history. But this story is not finished, because football history is written not by the players, not by the referees, but by you. Every comment, every memory, every opinion adds fuel to the fire. So I want to hear from you right now. Which of these rivalries shocked you the most? And which brutal duel did we miss? Drop your answer below. Argue, debate, fight, like the fans in these stadiums. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe to Kicksplosion_TV, because the next battle, the next war, the next unforgettable rivalry is already waiting. Football is not just a game. It is identity. It is history. It is war without weapons. And here, we will never let you forget it.